Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is Hawkcast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Go Iowa Awesome and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter. Before we get started today, make sure that you subscribe, leave that rate and review wherever you are listening. And of course, you can head over to iowa.rivals.com/subscribe to get that inside information on the Hawkeyes from us in recruiting, basketball, and football, of course. You can do that today. You can do that right now, again, at iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. This episode, we're joined by Dylan Callaghan-Croley of Happy Valley Insider to preview that Penn State, the Iowa versus Penn State game this weekend in Happy Valley. It's a whiteout, and it is a night game. Gonna be absolutely crazy. Dylan, you and I were just talking a little bit about our expectations for this game ahead on Saturday. And if you can give me a quick preface of what your thoughts are going into this one. We'll get into the thick of it here in a moment, but just initial thoughts going into this game on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really intriguing matchup, on paper. You take out maybe the injury sides of it for now. I think this is, an always a really well played rivalry game between these two. It may not be one that, you know, the outside world thinks of as a rivalry game, but since these two teams have been in the same conference, it's always been great games. I mean, of course, there's the 6-4 game almost 20 years ago. There's the game just 2 years ago in Iowa City as well. So I think it's going to be a well-fought game. I think it's going to be, a back and forth defensive battle for the most part. But after what Penn State struggled with a little bit against Illinois last week, I think there's definitely some places where Iowa can exploit the Nittany Lions this week, or their offense this week. And I'm very intrigued to see how this one goes.
Now, in regards to Penn State's schedule to this point, you mentioned Illinois. Yeah. Obviously, the turnovers came aplenty, I suppose, for the Penn State defense last week. We were also talking about the Iowa schedule just before this, is that the Hawks, while scores might indicate that they've been challenged, they haven't really been challenged to this point, definitely left points on the board. Very much the better team when it came to the Iowa State and, of course, Utah State as well. So Illinois, Penn State takes that 30-13 victory. I haven't been able to watch the entirety of it yet to get a good look at film before we go into this weekend. But what I've heard and what I was told about that game on Saturday is that it looked, I guess it wasn't as indicative as, okay, let me start over here. Sure. The score wasn't indicative as to how close the game was. Penn State was and is significantly better than Illinois, is what I heard. Thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, it was one of those kind of missed opportunities things for Penn State. I mean, they had 2 turnovers, I think, on Illinois' first 3 drives. They had the ball on Illinois' side of the field, and just couldn't punch them in for touchdowns. We saw that against West Virginia as well. Penn State, won that game 38, whatever it was. I forget off the top of my head, but it was also a game in week 1 against West Virginia that if Penn State takes advantage of a few opportunities, turns field goals, or has touchdowns instead of field goals, they win 52, whatever. Now what it was, 38. But last week against Illinois, Penn State was the much better team, I think, through and through. Defensively, the Nittany Lions dominated that game. You'll see that Illinois threw for 270 some yards in that game, but what we've seen over the first 3 weeks, especially against West Virginia and Illinois, is Penn State's getting their second team defense and backups, freshmen in there late in the midway through the fourth quarter, and the opposing offenses are having a little bit more success against those players, so the numbers are a little bit more inflated at that point. Offensively, there's a lot that Penn State needed to clean up. It was Drew Allar's, first road start. Illinois is a, very sound defensive team that has great defensive minds. So they knew what their game plan was going to be in terms of trying to fluster Drew in his first road start. And they did a good job at that. But Drew's also a very smart quarterback, and he makes smart throws. He doesn't throw many balls in, double or triple coverage. If he misses, where it's sailing out of bounds 5 feet over the wide receiver's head, doesn't have a great chance of being caught. He very rarely misses badly. But yeah, I definitely say the final score last week wasn't indicative of the true level of both teams. And yes, there were some things Penn State has to work on, but Penn State was very much the better team last week.
Now, 2 questions off of that. One is I guess, was that game an indication as to where the offense is at holistically? And 2, is this weekend Penn State's first real challenge of the season? Would you even consider it a challenge against Iowa? We know what the spread is. Yeah. Obviously, Iowa has been struggling offensively. Cade McNamara yet to really put it together. Both of those questions.
Sure. So I'm going to start with the second one. The second one, I would say defensively, definitely a challenge for this Penn State offense. And you could probably say last week was somewhat of a challenge. I mean, you look at Illinois during the first 2 weeks of the season, terrible on defense, but we also saw with Toledo and Kansas, what makes or breaks that Illinois defense is having a mobile quarterback. Penn State, obviously, with Drew, does not have a mobile quarterback, but once the backup, Bo Prabula, stepped in last week, he had success on the ground. So I think, the Illinois defense is better than the first 2 weeks may have indicated. I don't think it's the defense we saw last year, but it's definitely better than the first 2 weeks. But the Iowa defense, I think, is similar to the Illinois defense in terms of presenting a challenge, complicated looks for especially a young quarterback. But Iowa has better talent, better athletes, a smarter defense in general, one of the best defense coordinators in the country, a guy who's done it plenty in his career, obviously. So I think it's definitely a step up from even last week. Offensively, we'll see what type of challenge that presents for Penn State's defense. I think Penn State has a big edge there. But going back to your first question about Penn State's offense last week, it's a good question because this is a Penn State offense that is going to, for the most part, ground and pound opposing offenses. I mean, with that running back duo of Nichols, Singleton, to Katron Allen, Penn State should be running the ball 30, 35 times a game, 150 to 200 yards. Those are two of the best running backs in the country, in my opinion. But last week, what we saw was Illinois really selling out to stop that run. They were putting 8, 9 guys within the line of scrimmage almost consistently, forcing Penn State to force them to beat them over the top. Now, the problem is for Penn State and something to watch this week was arguably their most consistent wide receiver, Harrison Wallace III, was not playing last week, and that was a big loss for Penn State. Because beyond that, there is Keandre Lambert-Smith, their home run hitter, but there really isn't much proven commodities among Penn State's wide receiver room. And last week we saw them struggle a little bit with getting open. They did have a few drops as well. So I'll be interested to see how Penn State's wide receivers this week go up against Iowa's secondary. Because if Illinois' secondary gave them trouble, I imagine Iowa's is going to give them some trouble as well. And I think a lot of it comes back to Harrison Wallace III. If he's in there, Penn State probably has a little bit better chance of having an explosive passing attack. And with a quarterback like Drew, I'm not sure how much tape Iowa fans have watched, but this is the type of quarterback that, just looking at his skill set, he throws guys open. He has that talent. He's the type of quarterback talent that makes the guys around him better. But he's still, a sophomore quarterback who has 3 career starts. So he's going to have some mistakes at some point. It's just a matter of will those be mistakes that, make or break a game. So I definitely think it exposed some issues in Penn State's offense last week, but I'm not ready to say yet that it's, major issues that Penn State can't get by. I think going up against an Illinois defense that could provide some of the same challenges as Iowa, was a good appetizer per se for Penn State's offense in preparation for this week. So on that aspect, I think it probably helped game plan for Iowa this week.
Now with Harrison, yeah, for sure. Now with Harrison Wallace, what's the diagnosis? Do you know what the likelihood of him playing this weekend is?
Yeah, we are completely kept in the dark about injuries on the Penn State side of things. Unless it's a season-ending injury, we really don't know. Now, if our call was, about 3 hours later than it is right now, I could probably tell you because we have access to practice on Wednesday nights. And while, it's not always 100% of a guy practice on Wednesday, they're playing on Saturday, but it's usually a pretty good indication of where they are. Now, for on the other side of things, Amari Evans, a wide receiver for Penn State, who missed week 1, played in week 2. He practiced last Wednesday, but wasn't seen as well against Illinois. He's not a major name to know, but he's one of those young guys that Penn State thinks could have a breakout here this season if he can stay on the field, obviously, since he's missed 2 or 3 games. But so yeah, it's a big if, I guess, right now, if Wallace is available on Saturday. If he is, it's big for Penn State's wide receiver room, and if he's not there, it definitely opens up questions. Just because, like I said, outside of Keandre Lambert-Smith, not a lot of certainty about what you have. A lot of young guys, or a lot of guys that haven't been productive for Penn State yet. One of those guys being Dante Cephas, a Kent State transfer who was expected to do big things, just hasn't had a click for him at Penn State yet. James Franklin and Camp was talking about him having to adapt to the Power 5 game. It's different, going up against it once or twice a season. But for him, he's going up against one of the best secondaries in the country every day, and it just hasn't been a smooth transition for him.
Now, for Wallace's health, I'll definitely have you message me after practice,
sure.
and we can at the very least share that with our premium subscribers. All the more reason to head over to iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. Shameless plug here on Hawkcast on this Thursday edition of the show. Now, one of our points of conversation yesterday in media availability was the matchup of Penn State's secondary with these receivers who haven't really been involved with the Iowa offense. They have, but not to the degree that, an offense, I guess, that folks would like in terms of especially with the talent that is in that group at Iowa, in Caleb Brown coming from Ohio State, Seth Anderson, who's been productive so far, Deontay Vines and Nico Ragaini, who have been with the program, and a quarterback like Cade McNamara and the expectations that you have with a guy like Cade. There's some real talent in that secondary. What kind of issues or difficulties do they present for opposing receivers?
Yeah, I mean, Penn State loves physical defensive backs, especially, at corner. This is one of the most physical DB rooms, I'd have to say, probably in the country. They don't really back down from any challenge. They play tight coverage and man-to-man all the time. In zone, they're still, very dangerous. It's just, I think the thing with them is that, all right, you're not throwing Kalen King's way, that's fine. But then, you still are targeting guys like Johnny Dixon, who is a guy who could go on to play in the NFL. Daquan Hardy, one of their nickelbacks who missed the first 2 games, returned last week against Illinois. There is some rust, obviously, but he also had a tremendous interception in that game on perfect coverage. And then they have guys like Cam Miller, and they even have some true freshmen playing this year in Eliot Washington, Zion Tracy, and at safety they have another one in King Mack as well. So it's just the depth that I think is really dangerous for Penn State when it goes for opposing teams going up against Penn State. It's just because it's just not Kalen King out there. It's the whole starting unit, and it's the whole 2 deep. Anybody who's out there can make game-changing plays, and I really do think this is maybe the best secondary in the country, because outside of the fourth quarters, when it's the second, third string defense out there, this has been an extremely hard secondary to throw into. Yeah, they'll have their busted coverages every now and then, but it's far and few in between. And when you combine that with the Penn State pass rush, which according to Pro Football Focus has 70 total quarterback pressures through 3 games, it's a deadly combination to say the least. Because if you're not getting the ball out right away, you're risking a sack, but and then throwing it into the secondary, whether you're getting it right away or holding on to the ball, it's a dangerous game.
I just was exasperated for a moment. For those of you who didn't hear that sigh on my mic, that is a lot of pressures through 3 games. Now, granted, first 2 games played Delaware and West Virginia, West Virginia is a Power 5 program, but so and I'm not sure how good Illinois' offensive line is to this point.
Yeah, I would definitely. I'm actually going back and looking right now. 15 of those pressures came against Delaware, but last week against Illinois, Penn State really started clicking on the defensive side of the ball, especially on that defensive line, where they were really racking up the pressures on Luke Altmyer. I'm looking at last week they had, according to Pro Football Focus, 34 pressures on Luke Altmyer, and you saw what happened with Luke Altmyer throwing 4 interceptions in that game. The pressure just kept getting to him. And that's the thing about this Penn State defensive line too. It's not just one guy or 2 guys. They have 4 guys they confidently can put out there and think they could get to the quarterback any pass rush.
Now, flipping that, the Iowa defensive line and the Penn State offensive line was another topic of conversation that we hit on quite a bit yesterday. What's I guess generally the strategy to this point for opposing offenses has been that thing you mentioned, is getting the ball out quick against Iowa's defensive line and their pass rush, because that's probably, if without Noah Shannon, I would say, well, previously the defensive line group and the tight end group were the 2 deepest positions. Now the defensive line group doesn't have Noah Shannon. The tight end group doesn't have Luke Lachey. So obviously taking hits in terms of talent and guys that have been with the program for a little while, but Iowa's defensive line is still among some of the best in the country, with the talent that they've brought back and the production that they've put forth. And I believe it's Penn State's left tackle that is pretty highly regarded, correct?
Yeah, Oluf Fashanu. Yeah,
okay.
Potential top 5 draft pick next fall. Yeah, next spring.
Bingo. Yeah. Yes. So is that a topic of conversation to this point with the Penn State, fan base and those that are covering the game?
Yeah, I mean, it's the offensive line. It's one of those things you look at the numbers themselves, and they're not terrible. I think Penn State, let me look at here, has given up 1 sack this season. They've given up a couple pressures, but Drew Allar is just well beyond his years when it comes to his pocket presence, his ability to climb a pocket, avoid getting hit, getting the ball away, which helps. But the Penn State offensive line hasn't exactly been, a brick wall this year. And now that's for a couple reasons. One, in week 1, they struggled with they had a few new starters. Last year, they had Drew Scruggs at center. Scruggs has moved on to the NFL. That moved Hunter Norzad, a Cornell transfer, from guard to center. Norzad has had an up and down first few weeks. He's also a guy who, during his career at Penn State, has always seemingly been banged up. Not enough to where he can't play, but if you're banged up that much, it has to hurt you on the field to a degree. And also the right side of the offensive line has always kind of been a little bit of a struggle last year, especially Caden Wallace and Sal Wormley are their right tackles and right guards respectively. Wallace has stepped up this year to a degree. Wormley, on the other hand, their guard, has kind of struggled in both the pass rush and the run blocking. Going back to Norzad, it's been a mixed case so far this year. He had a tough matchup last week against Jaziun Newton, who's obviously one of the better defensive tackles in the entire country. I think the bigger question for Penn State's offensive line as a whole right now is the run blocking. It has not been good at all. Now part of that is now I shouldn't say not good as all, but can't speak. But it's been a struggle at times. Their pass rush has been pretty solid. Olu Fashanu has been outstanding. He rarely allows a quarterback pressure. And then the rest of it has been okay in the pass rush, but they're not allowing a ton of pressures, which I guess ultimately is the big, the big thing. But the run blocking has been a concern. Fashanu, despite being a great pass blocker, not a great run blocker, and they're just not getting a lot of push on that offensive line. Now, part of that is teams selling out to stop the run. I mean, it's going up against Nick Dawkins and Katron Allen is a huge test for any defense. So put in, 6, 7, 8 guys within the box is been kind of the MO for opposing defense these first few weeks. And it's definitely hurt Penn State's offensive line. It always feels like somebody's going missed, in blocking schemes. But and I think that's where Iowa's going to have probably their most success. I think they'll have success in getting to Drew as well in the passing attack. But I think the big question is how much can Iowa slow down Penn State's rushing attack? Penn State has had very few explosive plays on the ground. They'll have 3 or 4 a game so far, but compared to last year, that's nothing. So that's, I think, the big area of concern for Penn State is just how to get the run game going against this Iowa front seven, because if you don't get the run game going, that obviously makes throwing the ball a lot harder. But that goes back to the wide receiver discussion we had. Without Harrison Wallace III, the wide receiver room is a little less scary. And if teams, are not afraid to take their chances with Penn State throwing the ball, they can sell out against the run more often and be more successful doing so as well.
Now, we've talked about obviously the front lines, everything in the trenches, the secondaries, wide receiver groups, quarterbacks. Is there anything else that when you look at this matchup, we got to talk about XYZ, right? We got to consider this factor. Is there anything else that jumps off the page to you when it comes to this game? Because obviously the trenches are up there, the secondaries and the quarterbacks are going to be the bigger things. But I mean, for example, for me, it was the thing again that we talked about before we started recording is not only is the Iowa offense missing Kaleb Johnson and Jazz Patterson, but they've got 2 freshman running backs back there, true freshman running backs. Yeah. Obviously, Leshon Williams is the guy that'll be the bell cow for the offense in terms of running backs. But then it's Kamari Moulton and then it's Terrell Washington, 2 true freshmen. And obviously losing Luke Lachey is just a heartbreaker for this team because he's a leader. He's just a really good dude, and he's arguably your best player. But at tight end, you've got guys that can step up and not necessarily be Luke Lachey, but that can be productive. Obviously, you got Eric All coming out of the portal. Steven Stylianos and Addison Ostrenga have been impressive. And then in that 4th spot, Johnny Pascuzzi, who we won't see a ton of, but has the greatest last name of all time. Sure. Now, so those are the things, the injuries, who's filling those roles. Those are the things that stick out to me, other than what we've already talked about for this pod. Yeah,
for me, I think the thing that really sticks out to me is on both sides, this is going to be a very interesting matchup for linebackers versus tight ends. I mean, these are 2 of the best tight end schools, obviously, in the country. Obviously, Iowa's tight end U, and Penn State obviously likes to kind of make similar monikers about themselves as well. But I mean, both schools, I think we both agree, have produced absolutely great tight end talent over the last few years. But you look at Penn State, this is a Penn State linebacker room that is very athletic, with especially Curtis Jacobs and Abdul Carter, 2 of the best, I think, linebacker duo, one of the best linebacker duos you can probably find in the Big Ten and in the country. Abdul Carter is probably a guy I should absolutely mention. Game changing type linebacker for Penn State. I hate to throw out, the Micah Parsons type comparisons because Micah was a very different animal. Abdul was very good, but Micah was obviously just a ridiculous talent. And Abdul has a chance to be to a similar level, but he has a very similar skill set. He can be good in coverage. He's good against the run, and he's an elite pass rusher. But Curtis Jacobs is very athletic and, stay with most tight ends as well. So I'm going to be interested to see how those two match up against, Iowa's tight end room. And then I haven't watched a ton of Iowa tape just yet, but I'm interested to see how Penn State's tight end duo of Tyler Warren and Theo Johnson matches up against an Iowa linebacker room that obviously looks pretty solid, but also you look at the stats, has allowed, I think, a 70% completion percentage or somewhere around there this year. Now the total yardage isn't terrible, but anytime you're allowing 70% of completions, especially if you're going up against a very talented tight end room, raises an eyebrow, because if you allow this Penn State tight end room, in my opinion, to have that many opportunities, there's a quality chance one of the tight ends is going to, be able to make a play on one of those. And in a game like this with two elite defenses, it may only take, a tight end getting loose once to change the game. I mean, it wasn't an Iowa game, but I think back to Penn State, Michigan, I think 2 years ago, and the deciding play in that game was an Eric All touchdown on a missed tackle. It should have been, Eric All should have been wrapped up, I think it was 5-10 yards from the line of scrimmage, but instead he breaks the tackle and goes 60-70 yards for what would be the game-winning touchdown. And I think it's going to be a similar matchup this week on paper, where this could be a close game between the two teams, where if one of these two teams tight ends make a big play, it could be the decider. So I think that's an interesting matchup on both sides, just which linebacker room is going to have the advantage against tight ends or have the better game. That could be a matchup that does decide the game.
You referenced 2 years ago. Obviously, Penn State came to Iowa City and Iowa took the victory. The staff, I guess, Coach Ferentz and a few players were asked about that, and they didn't want to give it the time of day. It was basically like, yeah, that was 2 years ago. It was fun, but we're on to this game. Has that been a point of conversation to this point for Penn State? And is that fresh in their minds, I guess?
If you ask James Franklin and his staff, they're going to absolutely say no. It has absolutely been a discussion point among media and fans. I mean, and no discredit to Iowa, but you look back at that Iowa Penn State game 2 years ago when Sean Clifford went down. Penn State was up 2 scores, and they were moving the ball with will at that point. And I think if Sean Clifford doesn't get hurt, I don't know if it would have been a blowout, but I think Penn State probably wins that game. I think that's going to obviously be in the back of James Franklin and his coaching staff's minds. You look back in James Franklin's coaching history, and I don't want to, petty is not the right word, but when he has the opportunity to make statements against teams that, has beat him in the past, or he hasn't liked how something has happened in the past, Franklin has the tendency to kind of keep his foot on the pedal. But I think even more so, a whiteout crowd is already going to be a tough environment for anybody. But even if Penn State's coaching staff doesn't say this week or 2 years ago is playing any factor, which I don't think it shouldn't. That was 2 years ago. It's a different team. This Penn State team is much different than that one. But for Penn State fans, they obviously remember what happened 2 years ago. So I think, especially early on, that's going to add a little bit of extra oomph to the crowd. The crowd's going to be a little bit more hyped up. But yeah, I definitely think Penn State is not going to take their foot off the pedal in this one. If they have the opportunity, in the third quarter, early fourth quarter, but I also don't expect it to be in a scenario where Penn State has those opportunities late to, take the foot off the pedal, because I'm just not sure. Penn State's offense is going to get a big enough lead against this Iowa defense where, um, you know, they feel comfortable maybe, trying to air it out late, trying to make a statement. But also, even if they do, it's in the playoff era. There's two other teams in the Big Ten East that can make the college football playoffs. All three teams could very well go 11-1. Penn State needs all the style points per se this year. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, on paper, if you ask them, no, but yeah, they definitely are going to be thinking about that to a degree. And they, I think, have revenge on their minds for what happened 2 years ago.
Before I get your final score, final expectations, this is my first whiteout. Adam and I will be there in State College to cover this game. And for maybe folks who are listening that are going to be there, maybe it's their first whiteout. What the hell should we expect, man? It looks like a wild environment.
Yeah, it's I suggest for any, obviously, if Iowa fans are going, they're going to be tailgating all day with the Penn State faithful, and it may be an intimidating road environment, but I can assure you, for all Iowa fans out there, there's always a few assholes in the crowds, but 99% of Penn State fans, while you're passing by, they may give you, a little bit of crap, but they'll still, welcome you into the tailgate to have a bite to eat, to have, an adult beverage, whatever it may be. I'm sure everybody will get along just fine. But once the stadium gates open, it's going to be a whole different type of animal. That stadium is going to fill up. The gates open an hour and a half before kickoff, something like that. The stadium will be filled within the first 30 minutes, especially the student section. It's going to be loud from 60 minutes to kick all the way to kickoff, and the sound's not going to go down until the fourth quarter when the clock strikes zero. It is truly one of the best environments in sports. Earlier this year, Penn State, had a night game against West Virginia, and that was a pretty ruckus crowd. And I think a lot of that is not obviously, and obviously that was to a degree an old rivalry game, but let's be honest, anybody who's in that state, any student in that stadium wasn't alive last time Penn State played West Virginia. But I think a lot of it has to do with Penn State's expectations this year. In State College, expectations are that this is a Penn State team that can absolutely win the Big Ten, make the college football playoffs. Yeah, they have to beat one of Ohio State or Michigan. But I think if you ask most media members, we believe they can beat one of Penn State or Michigan. One of Ohio State or Michigan. It's just a matter of which one is it going to be. If they knock off Ohio State on the road, then everything's on the table in terms of what the possibilities are for this team. Now, of course, they have to beat Iowa first this week, which is going to be a test in itself. But I think a whiteout crowd, no matter what, is always crazy, ruckus, loud from 60 minutes before kick till the end. But I think you add in the expectations, you add in what happened 2 years ago in Iowa City, there's going to be a little bit, like I said, a little bit extra oomph in this crowd, and it's gonna be rocking. I mean, Tom Vanderheen of ESPN posted on Twitter, I think earlier today, about how he went to the bathroom a couple years ago when he went to the one whiteout in the press box, and he thought like the press box was going to collapse because how much it's shaken. The press box will absolutely be shaken. It is quite a feeling. It was shaken before kickoff against West Virginia, and I expect it to be shaken well before kickoff on Saturday against Iowa. It's an environment to enjoy, even as a rider, just because I haven't experienced a Kinnick night kickoff yet, but I'm very much looking forward to experiencing that down the road. It's just one of those moments as a college football fan, but as somebody, we do this because we love college football. We love going to these type of games, being in these type of environments. These are the type of environments you just take a step back for a minute and enjoy being there just because of the atmosphere that's being created around you.
Can't wait, man. I can't wait. It's going to be fun. And with that said, I'm here to disappoint Iowa fans and say I really think that Penn State takes the win in this one. I'd probably say if I had to, I changed my final score prediction right up until the very last moment on our premium board. I always do, at least like the day before, and say, hey, here's mine. What's yours? And so for right now, I'd probably say like 31-16, an advantage of Penn State. So
I think that's a pretty fair score. And I think the other thing we should absolutely note here, and something I've been actually tracking on Twitter a little bit, I'll probably put up an update after we get done here, is there is a chance of rain Saturday night in Happy Valley. How much rain, that remains to be seen. A couple days ago, it was going to be like 3/4 of an inch or 4 hours. Obviously, that's a lot of rain. Yesterday, it was supposed to be half an inch over 9 hours. Now it looks like it's going to be, spotty showers throughout the evening. So who knows how much rain will actually be coming down during the game. I think it's safe to say there will be some rain, but obviously how much rain will determine how Penn State can throw the ball. And I think if Penn State can't throw the ball, that definitely plays more into Iowa's hands and could definitely make this game closer. If the rain is, off and on, I think Penn State will be fine. Ultimately, like you, I'm somebody who goes back and forth. I will say one score, as a gut prediction, on a Sunday, and then by Saturday, it may look completely different. Ultimately, I think, like we said, my biggest question mark in this game is how is Iowa going to move the ball consistently? I think the over-under for team total in Vegas right now, if I heard earlier correctly, was like 12.5 points. I think 2 touchdowns is doable for Iowa. Penn State's defense is elite, yes, but this is a defense that will get, for how aggressive they are, with that aggressiveness often comes, a big play because somebody misses a tackle or you get burned on, a blitz. So I think a big play or two can definitely happen for Iowa, but I'm just not sure they're going to have enough big plays in this game offensively to really have a great chance of winning. I think they have a solid chance of winning, but I think it's going to take Iowa's defense forcing 2 or 3 turnovers, probably having to be around midfield or in Penn State's side of the field to really, make a difference in this game. So right now, I think I'm leaning Penn State 31-13, 31-16. I think they probably end up covering that score, but it's one of those games I can see if things go Iowa's way. I could see things going Iowa's way. Penn State still winning this game ugly 23-14. And I could also see a game where, Penn State is up maybe 24-10, but they get 2 big plays late because the Iowa defense has been on the field so much because the offense struggles to move the ball, gets 2 late touchdowns, and it then looks like a blowout, and Penn State wins, 38-10 or something like that. I think that's a little less likely, but I if you're locking me down to a score, I'm going to say give me Penn State 34, Iowa 13 right now. I think they cover the spread of 14.5 points right now, and I think they get a late touchdown that kind of seals the victory.
There you have it. We're both expecting a Penn State win. We will see how it shakes out on Saturday in Happy Valley. We'll wrap it up here. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of Hawkeyes, brought to you by Iowa.Rivals.com. If you're not a premium subscriber yet, you can do that at Iowa.Rivals.com/subscribe. We get you great inside information on all the recruiting, football, and basketball. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a rate and review wherever you're listening. That does help us out a lot. So for now, we'll see you next time.